It was a warm, golden afternoon in Boulder, Colorado. The local park buzzed with activity. Children darted across the grass chasing kites, joggers weaved through the winding paths, and families gathered under the canopy of leafy trees, enjoying the gentle breeze. Amid this peaceful scene, a black woman sat quietly on a bench by the water's edge, a thick paperback resting open in her hands. Her name was Danielle Rhodes, a seasoned defense attorney known across the state for her sharp mind and unwavering resolve. Today was rare. She had carved out a moment for herself, a pocket of calm in a schedule usually filled with courtrooms and legal briefs. Just as she turned a page, the jarring squeal of tires shattered the tranquility. A police SUV came to a halt near the curb, catching the attention of passers-by. Two officers exited briskly, scanning the park. Their expressions were rigid, their postures radiating a sense of command. Almost immediately, their eyes zeroed in on Danielle, the only person sitting alone nearby. "Excuse me, ma'am, can we have a word with you?" one officer called, his tone more accusatory than polite. Danielle looked up, her face composed, voice calm. "Sure," she said, marking her place in the book and closing it gently. The second officer approached with a clipped voice. "We received a report about suspicious behavior in this area. Mind explaining what you're doing here?" Danielle blinked, caught off guard. "Suspicious? I'm just sitting here, reading," she said, holding up the book as if to illustrate. But their gaze didn't soften. "Let's see some ID," the first officer demanded. Her heart rate rose, but her demeanor didn't falter. "Can you tell me why you need to see it?" "It's just procedure," the second officer replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. A few onlookers had paused, sensing the shift in energy. Some looked on with mild interest, others exchanged uneasy glances, as though witnessing something they couldn't quite explain but didn't like. Danielle exhaled slowly, reaching into her tote bag. She retrieved her wallet and handed over her license without a word. The first officer took it, studying the card far longer than necessary. "Danielle Rhodes," he said, almost as if testing the name on his tongue. "What exactly brings you here today, Ms. Rhodes?" "I'm a resident of Boulder," she replied evenly. "Just came here to enjoy the park, like everyone else." "Is that not allowed?" His jaw tensed. "We'll see," he muttered, returning her ID. But they didn't leave. Instead, they launched into a barrage of questions. "Is that a law book?" one officer sneered. "You expecting someone, or just here by yourself?" the other added, casually resting his hand on the equipment belt around his waist, a gesture Danielle had seen far too many times in her career. She had cross-examined witnesses, faced down aggressive prosecutors, and argued high-stakes cases in packed courtrooms. But this was different. This was power with no oversight, suspicion with no cause. Her voice stayed composed, but firm. "Unless you're accusing me of something specific, I'm done answering questions." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. That seemed to light a fuse. "Don't get mouthy," the first officer snapped, stepping closer. "We're doing our job." "And I know the law," Danielle replied, her tone sharpening slightly. "And I'm not breaking it by sitting on a park bench." But they weren't listening to reason. The first officer reached for her arm. "Stop resisting," the officer barked, though Danielle hadn't even moved. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, shocked, her voice laced with disbelief. The murmurs from the bystanders grew louder. A man near the bike path pulled out his phone, beginning to record. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated, louder this time, the phrase sounding more like a performance than a warning. Danielle's heart pounded as cold, metallic cuffs clamped down on her wrists. She struggled to stay composed, even as a wave of humiliation and disbelief surged through her. The officers led her toward the police vehicle, ignoring the murmured protests and questions from the small crowd gathering nearby. Danielle turned her head as they walked, her eyes locking with a young woman filming from a short distance. In that instant, there was a wordless understanding, a silent request to bear witness. The car door slammed shut behind her, and just like that, the world outside faded. But Danielle knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Inside the tight, stuffy backseat of the cruiser, her mind raced. She had spent years advocating for justice, defending clients, arguing in court, challenging systemic bias. Now, she was on the other side. The irony would have been laughable, if not for the sheer injustice of it. Her hands throbbed from the pressure of the cuffs. The only sound in the car was the crackling of the police radio. At the station, things deteriorated further. The booking process was cold and dehumanizing. Danielle was fingerprinted, photographed, and then led to a narrow holding cell lit by buzzing fluorescent lights. "Enjoy your stay," one of the officers smirked as he shut the door behind her. Danielle sat down slowly on the hard bench, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She kept going over the moment in the park. How had something so peaceful turned so ugly, so fast? The answer stung. It wasn't confusion or mistaken identity. It was bias. Clear and cruel. Hours passed before anyone spoke to her again. A younger officer appeared at the cell, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Rhodes," he said in a monotone voice, "you're being charged with obstruction and resisting arrest." "On what basis?" she asked, her voice firmer than she intended. "You'll have your chance to dispute it in court," he replied, already turning away. Danielle took a long breath, forcing herself to stay focused. The accusations were weak, she knew that, but she also knew that cases like hers didn't win themselves. Eventually, she was released on bail. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, the contrast from the station's stale interior hit her hard. By the curb stood her close friend and colleague, Renee, eyes full of worry. "Danielle." Renee rushed toward her. "Are you okay?" Danielle gave a small nod, but the trembling in her fingers betrayed her. "I'm fine," she murmured, though the word felt false on her tongue. As they drove away, Renee kept glancing her way, waiting for her to say more. Finally, Danielle spoke. "I'm not letting this go," she said quietly. "Not this time." Renee gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "What are you planning?" Danielle's voice grew steadier. "I'm tired, Renee. Tired of pretending that being professional protects us. I have the knowledge. I have the tools. And I'm going to use them." That night, she sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, surrounded by legal pads, notes, and open case books. She began sketching out the framework for a civil rights lawsuit against the department and the officers involved. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from controlled fury. In the following days, momentum began to build. The footage of her arrest, captured by the young woman in the park, had spread like wildfire online. People reached out, some she knew, many she didn't. Their messages were full of support, of shared pain, of stories long buried. Danielle's resolve deepened with every call, every email, every story. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. It was about something much bigger. And yet, even with her focus locked on the courtroom battle ahead, she couldn't have foreseen the twist that was still to come. In the weeks after her arrest, her firm grew uneasy. Senior partners voiced concerns, quietly urging her to let things cool down. They worried the media attention would damage the firm's image. Danielle stayed composed. But she didn't back down. "This isn't just about me," she explained calmly to the partners. "This is about the next woman who gets handcuffed for sitting on a bench. This is about precedent." The video had already shifted public perception. Now, Danielle was determined to shift the system. The video didn't just share Danielle's story, it ignited conversations across the city and well beyond. Clips of her calm, resolute demeanor as the officers dragged her away began circulating widely, transforming into a symbol of quiet defiance and strength against abuse of power. Reporters started reaching out, eager for interviews. But Danielle declined them all. She wasn't chasing headlines. Her focus was razor-sharp, building a case that would not only hold the two officers accountable, but also lay bare the deep-rooted issues within the system that enabled such behavior. Still, late at night when the world around her finally slowed, the emotional weight pressed in. She would replay the encounter in the park, the condescending tone in their voices, the sudden grip of the handcuffs, the concerned murmurs of onlookers. She couldn't stop wondering how much worse it could be gone. The thought turned her stomach, but it also steeled her will. One evening, as Danielle sifted through a pile of legal documents and case files, Renee arrived with takeout. "You've been at this non-stop," Renee said softly, setting the bag on the kitchen table. "I don't really have a choice," Danielle responded, not looking up from her screen. Renee took a seat across from her, watching her closely. "You know this isn't just about the lawsuit anymore, right? People are watching. They're looking to you." Danielle finally closed her laptop and met Renee's gaze. Her voice was low but firm. "I know. That's why I have to get this right." Her preparation was relentless. She combed through similar civil rights cases, pulled legal precedents, and compiled every shred of evidence to dismantle the officer's version of events. She assembled a dedicated team of attorneys, colleagues she trusted, each of them driven by a shared belief in justice and accountability. But Danielle didn't just fight her battle from behind a desk. She made time to connect with the community. She attended public forums and town hall meetings, listening to others share their own painful encounters with bias and mistreatment. At a local university, she delivered a talk on systemic injustice, urging young people to understand their rights and push for reform. One afternoon, after leaving a community center, she was walking back to her car when a stranger approached her. "Ms. Rhodes," the woman asked gently. "Yes. I just wanted to thank you," the woman said, her voice cracking slightly. "For standing up. For not staying quiet. You're doing it for all of us." Danielle felt a lump form in her throat. She offered a quiet smile. "I'm just trying to do what's right." The outpouring of support was powerful, but it brought a new kind of pressure. She couldn't afford to falter. Too many people were depending on her. Then, one day, her attorney called with an update. "The officers filed a motion to dismiss," he explained. Danielle expected that. A delay tactic, nothing more. But then his voice shifted slightly. "There's something else you need to know." She sat up straighter. "What is it?" "You've just been assigned to preside over one of their disciplinary hearings. Next month." Danielle froze. The irony nearly knocked the wind from her. After weeks of preparing to battle these officers in a courtroom, fate had turned the tables. Now she would be the one sitting on the bench, and they would stand before her. She leaned back in her chair, processing it all. Could she remain objective? Could she uphold the role of a fair judge, despite everything they had done to her? Then she remembered the condescending voices, the rough hands, the way they tried to strip away her dignity. But she also thought of the strangers who thanked her, the students who listened, and the communities rallying behind her. This wasn't a chance. This was her moment to show exactly what real justice looked like. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as people filed into the gallery. On the docket, an internal hearing for two officers accused of using excessive force in an unrelated incident. To the casual observer, it seemed routine. Just another entry in a long list of misconduct cases. At the defense table sat Officer Blake and Officer Martin, both in full uniform, wearing expressions of confident detachment. They leaned toward each other, speaking quietly, as if they were already planning how to move past this minor inconvenience. Then the door to the judge's chambers opened. A hush fell instantly over the room. Danielle stepped onto the bench, black robe flowing behind her, her steps purposeful. Her gaze was calm, her posture dignified, her authority unmistakable. She took her seat. Then she looked toward the officers. The transformation in their faces was immediate. Blake's eyes widened in disbelief, his jaw slackening. Martin stiffened in his seat, blinking rapidly as he recognized her. It was her. The woman they cornered and handcuffed. The woman they tried to intimidate in a public park. And now she was the one with the gavel. After the arrest at the park, Danielle Rhodes allowed a deliberate pause, letting the atmosphere settle like dust after a storm. Then, in a calm, unwavering voice, she began. This hearing is now in session. Please take your seats. The officers complied stiffly, their earlier bravado clearly shaken. Officer Blake leaned toward their attorney, whispering something under his breath. The lawyer nodded but kept his eyes on Danielle. For the first time since the ordeal began, Danielle felt a shift, a subtle, quiet turn of the tide. Still, she reminded herself, this wasn't about payback. Her role as a judge required impartiality, and she would meet that responsibility with integrity. Even so, no one in the courtroom could miss the weight of the moment. As attorneys began their opening remarks, Danielle listened closely, her expression focused, her pen moving steadily over her notes. Occasionally, her eyes drifted to the two men at the defense table. She noticed how their shoulders tensed, how their fingers tapped nervously against the wood. During a short recess, the officers stepped into the hallway. The judge, Blake hissed, trying to contain his disbelief. How the hell is that possible? This is some setup, muttered Martin, shaking his head in disbelief. Their lawyer stepped in quietly but firmly. It's not a setup. It's circumstance. And you need to concentrate. She's not your enemy, your actions are. But neither officer was listening. Their minds were spinning, caught up in the sheer irony of facing judgment from the woman they once mistreated. When court resumed, Danielle maintained her professional composure. Her tone was measured. The proceedings ran smoothly. But her presence clearly rattled the defendants. Every time she addressed them directly, their postures tightened. Their confident veneer slowly chipped away. At one point, during witness testimony, she caught Blake glancing her way. There was no defiance in his eyes. Only something quieter. Something that looked a lot like regret. By day's end, the courtroom was thick with unspoken tension. Danielle brought the session to a close with the firm strike of her gavel. We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9. As the room began to clear, Danielle lingered at the bench, organizing her papers. Out of the corner of her eye, She noticed Blake and Martin hovering near the door. It looked like they wanted to say something, but whatever courage they had faltered, and they slipped out in silence. For Danielle, the hardest part wasn't the symbolism of the moment. It was the choices that lay ahead and the question of whether justice could truly be served. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. News of the unexpected twist had spread, drawing in observers, community members, even journalists. Some came out of support. Others out of sheer curiosity. Danielle entered with her usual quiet dignity. The air was electric, but she was steady. The attorneys wasted no time. The prosecutor laid out a clear, compelling case testimony, body cam footage, eyewitness accounts. "Your Honor," he said, his voice echoing across the chamber, "this was not a simple misstep. This was a clear abuse of authority. These officers acted without cause, and in doing so, they violated the very principles they swore to uphold." Danielle nodded slightly, taking it all in. Her pen moved smoothly across the page, her focus razor sharp. The defense rose to respond. "While we acknowledge that the incident was regrettable," the attorney began, "it must be understood in context. The officers faced a tense situation, and their actions, though perhaps imperfect, were not malicious." As the arguments wore on, Danielle found herself struck by the parallels between this case and her own experience. The explanations. The justifications. The way truth was spun into something almost unrecognizable. Still, she held her emotions in check. This wasn't about her. It was about the facts. When the victim, a young man named Elias, was called to testify, the tension thickened. "They never gave me a chance," he said, voice trembling but honest. "One second I was asking why I was being stopped, the next, I was face down on the pavement." "Did you resist?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Elias replied. "I did exactly what they told me. But it didn't matter. It was like they already decided I was the problem." The defense tried to poke holes in his statement, but Elias stood his ground. Then came the moment the room had waited for. The officers were called to the stand. Blake went first, glancing nervously toward the bench as he raised his right hand. "I thought the situation was going south," he said. "I made a decision in the moment. Do you stand by that decision?" He hesitated. "At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. But, looking back, I should have handled it differently." "Differently how?" "Maybe not by slamming someone unarmed to the ground." The silence that followed was louder than any words. Martin's testimony was no stronger. His efforts to justify their choices rang hollow. He spoke more from instinct than conviction, and each attempt to defend their actions only solidified the prosecutor's case. Danielle observed it all, her face unreadable. But inside, she felt a complex mix of frustration and empathy. These men had once worn their badges with pride. Now, they looked like shadows of the roles they were supposed to fill. By the time closing statements were delivered, the outcome felt clear. "This court," the prosecutor said, "must send a message: power without accountability is a danger to us all." The defense's final plea was feeble, their words more resigned than persuasive. Danielle adjourned the session with composure. "A ruling will be issued 1 week from today." As the crowd filtered out, Blake and Martin lingered near the exit. Their faces pale, their energy drained. Reality was settling in. But justice, Danielle believed, wasn't only about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, consequences, and the work of rebuilding trust. A week later, the courtroom filled once again. Danielle stepped out and took her seat. The room was silent. Reporters lined the walls. "This is no longer just about two individuals," she began. "This hearing has become part of a broader reckoning about the kind of justice our communities deserve." She looked toward the officers. "The duty of law enforcement is to protect with fairness, humility, and integrity. When that duty is violated, the damage ripples far and wide." She paused. "The evidence has shown that officers Blake and Martin used force beyond what was necessary or justified. Their behavior reflected not only poor judgment, but a pattern of misuse of authority. The sentence, unpaid suspension, required completion of a comprehensive retraining program, and permanent notation of misconduct on their official records. It was not vindictive. It was measured, fair and necessary." Danielle struck the gavel. "This hearing is now concluded." The officers stood slowly. Blake hesitated, then turned to her. "Your Honor," he said softly. "I'm sorry." Danielle gave a small nod. She didn't forgive him, not yet. But she acknowledged his words. True accountability, she knew, would be measured by what came next. That evening, she attended a public meeting at a neighborhood center. The room buzzed with energy, people sharing stories, asking questions, voicing pain. An elderly woman approached Danielle at the end, eyes shining. "What you did," she whispered, squeezing her hand, "it meant more than you'll ever know." Danielle smiled gently. "It's only the beginning. We've still got work to do." In the weeks that followed, meaningful conversations blossomed between citizens, city officials, and law enforcement. Danielle used her position to push for reform, to advocate for policies grounded in transparency and fairness. The ripple effect reached beyond her city. And as she stood on the courthouse steps one afternoon, watching a peaceful youth-led demonstration take shape, she felt something unexpected: hope. The system still had cracks. But the voices rising to challenge them were louder now. And that, she thought, was justice worth fighting for.